Bennu. And we have seen similar activity on larger asteroids through telescopic observations, but we haven't seen this sort of activity at the low energies that we observe on Bennu. So it's giving us a better sense of the range of active asteroids that exist in the solar system. Just to give some perspective for the range of energies that we see these sort of ejection events, if you were to snap a cracker at Bennu, and we have seen similar activity on larger asteroids through telescopic observations, but we haven't seen this sort of activity at the low energies that we observe on Bennu. So it's giving us a better sense of the range of active asteroids that exist in the solar system. Just to give some perspective for the range of energies that we see these sort of ejection events, if you were
during the program. So let me get to the first ones of those. Ankur on Twitter asks, how big is the asteroid and does it have a particular orbit?
So I can go ahead and answer the first part. So Bennu is about 500 meters in its longest dimension, and to give some perspective, that's about the size of the Empire State Building, so about 100 stories. Do you want to answer the question about the orbit, Mike?
Yeah, Bennu is in a near-Earth orbit, so it's in an orbit around the Sun that is very close to the Earth's orbit, and it actually crosses the Earth orbit. And as Danny alluded to, that's one of the reasons Bennu is such an interesting object for
I can go ahead and answer the first part. So Bennu is about 500 meters in its longest dimension, and to give some perspective,
how close it might come to the Earth.
Okay, appreciate that. So, can you tell us where the name OSIRIS-REx comes from?
So OSIRIS-REx is, as our principal investigator likes to say, an awesome acronym. So all of those letters have individual meanings. It stands for origin, security, spectral interpretation, resource identification, regolith explorer. So there's a lot there.
That's pretty good. Okay, well, I hope that answers that question. Let's see what we got. Another one. Gemfef on YouTube asks, what are you looking for when you go to the sample?
Origin, security,
What are you looking for?
spectral interpretation, resource identification, regolith explorer. So there's a lot there.
That's pretty good.
Interested in whether or not
Okay, well, I hope that answers that question.
From my perspective as a scientist,
Let's see what we got. Another one.
whether or not these sites might have
Gemfef on YouTube asks, what are you looking for when you go to the sample?
origin, security,
What are you looking for?
spectral interpretation, resource identification, regolith explorer. So there's a lot there.
That's pretty good.
Interested in whether or not
Okay, well, I hope that answers that question.
from my perspective as a scientist,
Let's see what we got. Another one.
whether or not these sites might have
Gemfef on YouTube asks, what are you looking for when you go to the sample?
origin, security,
What are you looking for?
spectral interpretation, resource identification, regolith explorer. So there's a lot there.
That's pretty good.
Interested in whether or not
Okay, well, I hope that answers that question.
from my perspective as a scientist.
In late 2018, as NASA's OSIRIS-REx spacecraft neared its target, Bennu, the asteroid grew in detail from a few tiny pixels to an incredibly high-resolution image. OSIRIS-REx confirmed the asteroid's basic shape, which was originally observed in 1999 by ground-based radar at Arecibo Observatory. What scientists didn't expect was just how rough and boulder-filled the asteroid would turn out to be. While it can be difficult to fully grasp Bennu's unfamiliar surface, it's helpful to understand the scale of what you're seeing here. In this image, the brightest boulder is the length of a horse, and the large boulder in this image is the width of a soccer field. Another challenge for the mission is the asteroid's small size and weak gravity. This means that OSIRIS-REx needs to fly daringly close to the surface in order to enter into orbit. With its orbital A phase, OSIRIS-REx successfully entered the closest ever orbit for a spacecraft, setting a Guinness World Record in the process. Then, 6 months later, it beat its own record during its orbital B phase and approached to within a few hundred meters of the rocky surface. Because OSIRIS-REx flew so closely over the surface during orbital B, the team was able to map the topography and shape of Bennu better than we have our own moon. In addition to mapping asteroid Bennu, OSIRIS-REx plans to collect and return a sample back to Earth. To do that, this spacecraft will carefully tag the surface of Bennu. The OSIRIS-REx team has selected 4 possible sample sites for the mission: Osprey, Kingfisher, Nightingale, and Sandpiper. The spacecraft has been closely imaging these sites from different angles to select the best touchdown spot for OSIRIS-REx. What was originally envisioned as a smooth and easy touchdown on Bennu's surface has become a complex endeavor to tag a small, crowded space on the asteroid, an area no larger than a few parking spots, by mid-2020. The OSIRIS-REx team has already pushed the boundaries of scientific exploration, going from ground-based radar images all the way to being a few hundred meters from the asteroid's surface, and is now mere months away from a sample collection attempt.
All right, well, that video gave us a lot of perspective on just how hard it has been to explore Bennu once the spacecraft got there and all the surprises that the team encountered. But we are now getting ready to select that sample site and tell the world about it. And we've heard a little bit about Bennu and where it is, what it looks like, and now we're going to get a little bit more into the why of why we do this. I'm pleased to be joined by Dr. Lori Glaze, who's head of the Planetary Science Division at NASA headquarters.
Hi, Gray.
Welcome, Lori. So, tell us, why do we do sample return?
It's a great question. So we've been observing Bennu now for about 20 years, first observed using ground-based telescopes, and then over that 20-year period we've continued to observe the asteroid using ground-based and space-based observations, and then over the last year, of course, we've been able to observe using the OSIRIS-REx spacecraft, but all of those measurements and observations are remote sensing observations. They're done from a distance, and there really is just no substitute for being able to actually pick up some of that material from the surface and bring it back to Earth. By bringing it back, that allows us to use the full capabilities of all of our state-of-the-art technologies and laboratory facilities to analyze those samples, to answer some of the really big questions that we have that Danny was talking about when she was sitting here. And not only can we answer those questions using our facilities today, but we'll actually preserve most of the sample for all of the generations to come, that they can then use new facilities and new instrumentation that we haven't even dreamed of yet.
Wow, that's going to be amazing. So, what in particular do we think we'll learn from Bennu?
So Bennu is actually going to address several major questions, and 3 big ones in particular. First off, you heard, or you said earlier, that Bennu we think is a really old object that's really a remnant and preserved from the very earliest parts of our solar system. So by looking at those samples, we'll get insights and information telling us about what conditions were like when the solar system formed. And then Danny talked about how we think there are hydrated minerals and perhaps organic molecules on the surface. And by looking at those, we'll better understand how those types of materials were delivered to Earth and perhaps were the seeds for how life actually began to form on Earth back in the earliest times. And then finally, it's also going to help us better understand what types of resources might be available on these asteroids that are out there, that as we start to take human exploration beyond the moon and start to go other places, there may be resources there that may be of use to us in the future.
Well, these are some really big questions. And I know OSIRIS-REx is a unique mission, but there are other missions in place going forward to get samples from other places, building on the Apollo moon rocks we have and going to Mars and so forth. How does that whole field fill in this?
Absolutely. So, of course, the Apollo missions were the first missions to actually bring samples back. We get natural samples all the time, of course, with meteorites that come through the atmosphere. But the Apollo missions brought those samples back. We're still analyzing those samples today, 50 years later. We just opened up some pristine samples a few months ago, or just trying to look at those with our new technologies, as I was saying. But we also are working right now with the Japanese Space Agency on their mission to visit another asteroid called Ryugu, and next December they'll be returning some samples from Ryugu that we'll be able to study another asteroid in comparison with Bennu. And then Japanese Space Agency is also planning a mission to the Mars moon named Phobos to bring back samples from there. And of course, NASA, next summer, will be launching the Mars 2020 rover, which will land in Jezero Crater, drive around, and collect samples from Mars that will be left on the surface for eventual return by a Mars sample return mission.
Well, there's a lot going on in this area. Thank you so much, Lori, for that perspective. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, now we're going to bring up the man with the answers. Dante Loretta is the principal investigator of OSIRIS-REx, and his team has been working round the clock since OSIRIS-REx arrived at Bennu last January 1st, and they discovered all those surprises we've been talking about. And he's going to give us an overview of how they narrowed down the multiple candidates for site selection and then announce the real one. So Dante, tell us about the whole process of narrowing these down.
Yeah, thanks, Gray. As you can see from the map of the asteroid behind us, when we first got there, the most obvious feature that we saw were these abundant, very large boulders, and overall a rough and rugged surface, very different than what we designed the spacecraft to sample. We were looking at sampling areas that were 25 meters in radius across, and quite honestly, I thought it was going to be obvious from the first images where the sample regions were and that it was going to be a straightforward site selection, and it was nothing of the sort. So the first thing to do was to complete the global characterization of the asteroid. We used our camera systems, we have laser altimeters for getting the topography, and we have several spectrometers for analyzing the mineralogy and the chemistry. And the science team did an amazing job of synthesizing all of that information and making a whole series of maps of the asteroid's surface. And then we went through several different ways to characterize it. We had the team looking at the imagery and the other data to pick areas that looked sampleable. We used machine learning algorithms. We also wrote specific software to find flat areas on the asteroid surface. And we also crowdsourced some of this information out to get the community involved in helping us select the sites. After that process, we actually had 50 different areas on the asteroid surface that looked like they might be interesting for us. And so I set it up kind of a tournament-style bracket. We ultimately got down to our Sweet 16, and then the Elite 8, and to the Final Four, where we are right now, about to crown the champion and the runner-up of this process.
All right, well, I understand you have some really cool videos of those Final Four sites, so why don't you go over them with us?
Yeah, let's take a look at the Final Four candidate sample sites. So we're going to start out with the Osprey crater. This is about 20 meters in diameter. One of the key features is the big flat rock that's 5 meters long. We call that 12 o'clock rock because it's almost pointing due north, and it kind of sets our orientation for us. It does look like it has some fine-grained sampled material, especially right towards the central region and in the trough or the ridge, beyond the ridge to the east there. But it is a kind of a rough and rugged surface, and so we do worry that it might be a little more challenging to ingest those 2-centimeter sized particles from its interior. But overall, the surrounding area, because it's up on kind of a hill, it's relatively free of hazards that we might fly into on the back away from collection. Let's take a look at the next one. This is the Kingfisher site. So this is similar to Osprey in that it's in an equatorial region, and we like the equator because the navigation team has higher accuracy when we're targeting equatorial sites. This is a smaller crater, about 10 meters in diameter. One of the most intriguing features are the two smaller craters that we in fact call the Mickey Mouse ears. Those look like the best, finest grained sampleable regions on the asteroid, but they're really small, on the order of 2 meters across, and we know we can't get the spacecraft into a spot that tight, but the hope was that that same kind of fine-grained material was accumulating in the center of this smaller crater. If we take a look at our next candidate, this is the Nightingale crater. So unlike Osprey and Kingfisher, this one's at high latitude up in the northern region of the asteroid. It's a crater about 20 meters in diameter. It's characterized by a lot of apparently fine-grained material. We do see a few large boulders that look like they've rolled down into the lowest depression over here on the right side of our image. And the most characteristic feature for me is this large wall of tall rocks. That does represent a potential hazard to the spacecraft, because when we make contact with the surface, the only thing that touches it is the sample collection head at the end of a long robotic arm. That may tip over a little bit, and we back away at whatever angle we've tipped to, and we're concerned that we might fly into some of those hazards. So let's take a look at the final site. This is the Sandpiper site. So this is also a high latitude site, except it's in the southern hemisphere of the asteroid. And unlike the other three sites, it's part of a much larger crater, about 50 meters in diameter. And what's really interesting here is the site itself is on one of the slopes of the crater wall. And it looks like there's a whole series of boulders that are kind of rolling down this terrain like a slow motion landslide. But the Sandpiper site appears to be shielded from that process by this large rock off to the south. So there's a whole swath of the crater wall that's relatively free of boulders and appears to be dominated by that fine-grained sampleable material.
All right. Well, those all look like great candidates. Well, you've seen them all now, and some of those space rocks you're seeing right now are going to be brought back to Earth. That's pretty exciting. So, Dante, do you want to tell us which one you've picked?
I will. So I'll say that just thinking that we're going to get this sample back to Earth sends chills down my spine. So the winner of the OSIRIS-REx Site Selection Championship is the Nightingale site.
All right. Make some noise, audience.
Thank you. So we recognize that this does have some hazards around it, and so we are doing a lot of work to make sure that we're targeting the safe regions, but this one really came out on top because of the scientific value. The high latitudes means that it stays relatively cool, and the primary objective of OSIRIS-REx is to bring back organic material and water-bearing material from the early solar system, and being in those high latitudes we think gives us the best chance to preserve that kind of material. Since we are dealing with a site with some hazards nearby, we have put some safety mechanisms onto the spacecraft. The spacecraft can actually tell if it's coming down onto a hazardous region and wave off and abort and fly away, fire thrusters and fly away from the asteroid. That may disturb the surface and make that region unsampleable. So we also have a backup site. The runner-up is the Osprey site. That's the 20-meter crater near the can get in there. It doesn't have the hazards that Nightingale does, but it also may be more challenging to collect a sample, but we think the lower hazards makes it the right choice for the backup.
Well, thanks for that, Dante. We do have a bunch of questions flowing in from social media. Again, use the hashtag AskNASA if you have one. And let's just go right to someone from in our audience. Aaron in the audience asks, what is the biggest challenge of the site?
So the biggest challenge of the Nightingale site is those large boulders that are off on the eastern edge of the crater, because that tallest one, I colloquially call it Mount Doom because it has the classic kind of peak shape that we're familiar with from the literature. That's about 7 meters tall, and then when you're down at the bottom of the crater, that's another 3 meters. So we're talking 10 meters or 30 feet. So it's a substantial building-sized obstruction, and we're trying to get into a crater that's on the order of a few parking lot spaces wide. So we are doing a really tight job parking that, and we're aware that we have hazards around us. So precision navigation to that sampled material is our biggest challenge.
Wow, well that's going to be some amazing engineering. Well, that's all the time we have for questions right now with Dante, but keep sending them in, and thank you so much, Dante, and congratulations.
Thank you.
So right now I'm going to invite Mike Moreau back to the stage, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the engineering that makes this amazing sample return possible. We have an instrument aboard OSIRIS-REx called the TAGSAM, which is actually going to ingest the sample in a very unique way that Mike's going to explain, and then cache that sample and to return it to Earth later after we get it. So welcome back, Mike.
Thank
you.
you.
Tell us a little bit about the challenges of the sample collection using this instrument.
Yeah, so you can imagine when the OSIRIS-REx mission was being formulated, engineers had a really interesting design challenge, and that's how do you collect a sample from an asteroid millions of miles away using a robotic spacecraft? And the TAGSAM is the innovation that our partners at Lockheed Martin came up with to do just that. The TAGSAM, as is shown here in full scale, and it actually sits at the end of a robotic arm at the end of the spacecraft. So the TAGSAM is the only piece of the spacecraft that will touch the surface, and in doing so, once contact with the surface is detected, there will be a nitrogen gas bottle that is fired, which stirs up the surface underneath the TAGSAM, churns up some of that fine-grained material, which will then be captured in the outer ring here. Once the spacecraft is contact for just a few seconds, it will fire its thrusters and back away, hopefully with the sample in hand.
So there's so many contingencies potentially here. What happens if it gets too close and it realizes it's a hazard or there isn't enough to even sample?
Yeah, so Dante alluded to this in his remarks. We've had to make some changes to the capabilities of the spacecraft to allow us to navigate into a site like Nightingale. And we've implemented something called a hazard map, which will be uploaded to the spacecraft. And then the onboard knowledge that the spacecraft has of where it's coming down, if it detects we're coming down on one of these hazards or too close, it will back away and we'll have a chance to try again.
Wow. Well, that's a good backup. What happens once you do get the sample collected? What happens to it?
So once we back away, the next couple of days will be spent assessing the health and safety of the spacecraft after contacting the surface and trying to figure out if we have a sample. The two primary ways that we'll figure out if we have a sample, one is just simply imaging the TAGSAM with the cameras on board the spacecraft. We'll be able to see if there's material that's captured inside the ring. The other technique that we're going to use is called the sample mass measurement. Surface and contact the sample. And there's been a lot of work already done to determine those trajectories and how accurately we can actually contact the surface.
At Benjamin on Twitter wants to know, how is the team's work changing now that you've got the focus? You know where you're going.
The team is incredibly excited now to have the site selection decision. And Nightingale is an exciting site to go into because of the challenges it's posing. And the team has really risen to the challenge, both to come up with how we would make the decision about the best site, but also to convince ourselves that we can actually get there and navigate the spacecraft successfully. So the team, I think, is really excited to be able to move forward and put all of our attention towards tagging at the Nightingale site.
Great. We've got just a couple more real quick here. I'm not sure if you'll be able to answer this yourself, but Lucy on Periscope wants to know, are there going to be precautions for quarantine once this is brought back?
That's not my expertise, but there will be great care taken when the sample returns to the Earth. It will enter the atmosphere in a small sample return capsule that will land in the Utah desert, and there will be a huge effort to recover the capsule and then transport it to Johnson Space Center, where there are facilities in place to curate and make the sample available to the public for analysis, for scientific analysis.
Thanks so much, Mike, and I want to thank everybody who was on the show today. That's all the time we have right now, but please continue to go to nasa.gov/OSIRIS-REx and keep following the mission. It's only going to get more exciting as it gets closer and does these sample return maneuvers and then gets the sample back to Earth later. So that's all the time we have for now. Until next time, let's go play tag.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond. Today we're going to talk about nutrition and the role it plays to keep astronauts healthy on the International Space Station. Hi, I'm NASA astronaut Tracy Dyson. Welcome to Station Life.
Center 2 for velocity calculation. You can go ahead and leave steps 4, 5, and 4, 6. We're moving on to
Tracy,
step
you want
5.
to go right now for that activity?
Thank you.
Okay, Tracy, we copy, and that's good information. We'll pass it along.
Good nutrition is a part of good health, whether you're on Earth or off. Today's show will focus on nutrition research aboard the International Space Station. That's one small bite for man, one giant leaf for mankind. Astronauts Scott Kelly, Kjell Lundgren, and Kimya Yui of Japan recently sampled the fruits of their labor after growing and harvesting a crop of outrageous red romaine lettuce from the Veggie Plant Growth Facility. This was the first crop of vegetables grown in space, specifically for the purpose of providing fresh vegetables for the astronauts. Later this month, the crew will harvest zinnia flowers, a precursor for the next crop. We're going to try tomatoes. You know, living in space changes our bodies in a number of ways. We lose bone mineral density, our muscles atrophy, Our cardiovascular system gets weaker, and we experience immune system dysfunction. One of the ways of understanding the changes in our bodies during long-duration spaceflight is to study our nutritional status at specific time points during our mission. Samples that we collect while we're in space provide scientists with information on bone metabolism, oxidative damage, body chemistry, and hormonal changes. These insights give scientists a more complete picture about what's happening in our bodies. That increased understanding of the role of nutrition in adaptation to spaceflight has a broader application on Earth. One example is understanding the relationship of nutrition to bone loss. This is potentially valuable for people suffering from osteoporosis right here on Earth.
The bones in our bodies are alive, growing, and changing all the time. Our bones are composed of different layers. The outer surface of bone is called cortical bone. This is the smooth, hard part of the bone that we can see when we look at a skeleton. Inside the cortical bone is the trabecular bone. This type of bone looks like a sponge and helps to protect the bone marrow. The constant process of bones growing and changing is known as bone remodeling. This process is carried out by specific cells in our bones. Cells called osteoclasts have the role of breaking down our bone and removing any parts that need replacing. At the same time, cells called osteoblasts have the job of making new bone and helping to repair any parts of the bone that have been damaged. On Earth, in healthy individuals, this process is normally balanced so that the same amount of bone is made and broken down. In space, astronauts are exposed to lower levels of gravity than on Earth. This means that they have less mechanical stress put on their bones as they move around. Scientists believe that the bones naturally try to adapt to this new environment by increasing the rate that the bone is broken down by the osteoclasts. Meanwhile, bone formation continues to occur at the same rate as it does on Earth. The result is an imbalance in bone remodeling, which leads to an overall decrease in bone mineral density. While in space, astronauts can manage with lower bone density, but when they return, their bones are less able to cope with Earth's gravity. This increases the risk of fracture and injury. Scientists use many different tests to measure the density of the astronauts' bones. Results show that the astronauts, while in space, lose bone in a similar pattern to people on Earth who suffer from osteoporosis, but the astronauts lose it at a much faster rate. Scientists have found that exercise, when combined with good nutrition and increased vitamin D intake, is able to preserve some of the bone that was previously being lost. Since 2008, astronauts have been able to use a new exercise machine called the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, or ARED. It is thought that this increase in force triggers the formation of new bone, bringing more balance to the bone remodeling process and allowing the bone density to stay at roughly the same level as it was before the spaceflight. It is a significant achievement to be able to maintain bone density in space, but more experiments need to be carried out to see whether the new bone which is formed in space has the same structure and strength as new bone which is formed on Earth. Understanding bone loss associated with microgravity may lead to better preventive care or therapeutic treatments for people on Earth suffering bone loss as a result of bone diseases like osteopenia and osteoporosis, or for patients on prolonged bed rest.
One of the things I love about the field of nutrition, one of the things that really drew me into the field of nutrition as a graduate student was the fact that nutrition really is a cross-cutting science, and the fact that we get to look at all the systems and nutrition in and of itself. So doing bone studies and muscle studies and vision studies and cardiovascular studies really helps to branch out and to work with other groups and see the integration within the human being and not just focused on a specific enzyme in a specific tissue in a petri dish in a lab somewhere in a basement. One of the great things about nutrition research on Space Station is that Space Station is a great platform and that it allows us to study very healthy individuals in a very strange environment, in a very unique environment that the body is trying to adapt to. And what that does, that allows us to understand how the body responds to these changes. And in many ways that reflects disease patterns or altered physiology, if you will, on Earth. So bone is a great example where when an astronaut is put into spaceflight, the body starts to break down bone because the body realizes it doesn't need the same skeleton in weightlessness as it did on Earth. And by looking at that adaptation and how to counteract that adaptation, that tells us about how the body responds to these different changes. So we see roughly the same change in bone in about 6 months on a space station mission as you would see in a much longer period, 4 or 5 years. So it's almost like time-lapse photography where we can see a much faster glimpse of what's going on. We can study countermeasures much more quickly. And again, the implications of those studies for people studying those same phenomena on Earth really helps to leapfrog some of the technology ahead. Hi, my name is Scott Smith. I'm the lead for the Nutritional Biochemistry Lab at the Johnson Space Center, and we're studying nutrition off the Earth for the Earth.
In space and on Earth, our bodies require proper nutrition. Defining the nutrient requirements for spaceflight and ensuring provision and intake of those nutrients are primary issues for astronaut health and mission success. After all, you are what you eat. One challenge is providing appetizing food for astronauts that doesn't require refrigeration and has a long shelf life. While the food is generally much better than you might imagine, and we have come a long way since the early days of spaceflight, we do have limited access to fresh foods. In our next segment, we'll go inside NASA's Space Food Systems Laboratory, as seen in the National Geographic Space Station Live program.
Eating in space is its own kind of fun. But keeping astronauts fit and healthy is a serious business. Michelle Clinch is responsible for what they eat.
We're making spaghetti with meat sauce.
Space meals begin just like ours do, with a trip to the supermarket.
Thank you.
But the similarities stop there. Spaghetti and meat sauce is just one of the 250 things on the space station menu. Each portion is meticulously calibrated.
We have a database where we maintain the nutritional content of all our products, calories, fat, protein, carbohydrate, things like that.
But the most important calculation is what things weigh. That's because it costs $10,000 for every pound blasted off to the astronauts. So NASA adopted a reduction technique, also used by the military.
Freeze drying removes a high percentage of the moisture, so typically when we freeze dry our products, we take them down to about 3%.
Each portion now weighs just 1 ounce. Cost to transport, $660. 1,300 miles away, and the orbital Cygnus resupply module is being loaded with the freeze-dried food. And it's time for a few last-minute food luxuries.
These are the tortillas. They're very popular on orbit.
After a daily routine of freeze-dried meals, a fresh piece of fruit is a welcome relief, well worth its weight in gold.
As you can see, we're only sending 3 apples, so you may think that's unfair because we have 6 people on orbit. They may have to share.
This very precious cargo is one of the last things to be loaded onto the rocket.
It's on its way.
3, 2, 1.
Less than a kilometer away from us now.
2 days later, Cygnus docks with the space station.
We're getting ready to birth the Cygnus 1 vehicle. All right. Looks really good. Perfect. Perfect. All right. Bonus food.
Including some surprise treats from their families.
Wow. Look at that. Tortilla. The real tortillas. Look at that. Real tortillas. Pours in. Wow. Oh my goodness gracious. The greatest hot dog relish in the history of man. Oh my gosh, my wife didn't tell me about this.
Hello, and welcome to Node 1. In the boxes you see here, we keep our food on the International Space Station, and specifically the food that we are currently eating. And in our logistics module, Leonardo, where I was just now, we keep our supplies. We keep them in soft containers like this one, which we call bobs. And this one is a very special bob for me because it contains my bonus food, the food that I chose myself based on my preference and my taste. This one, for example, is one of my absolute favorites. It's quinoa salad with mackerel. Mackerel is a great source of healthy proteins, but also of healthy fats. Those fats that our body absolutely needs to stay healthy and in good shape. On board we have different kinds of fish, which are great sources of healthy fat. For example, thanks to our Russian colleagues, we have sturgeon. In my bonus food, I also took sources of healthy fats that I can eat for a snack. I love avocado, for example, so I took it in form of guacamole that I can spread on my bread. Or I also love dry fruit, so I have almonds and nuts. And I didn't forget to take olive oil. And I can tell you, our rehydrated veggies not only taste a lot better with olive oil, but they're also a lot healthier. So I hope you will put the right rocket fuel into your body, starting with the right types of fat. And remember, eating healthy is not rocket science.
You know, I don't know the reason behind it, but your taste buds change when you get to space. So the things that you like on Earth and you just can't get enough of, you've got enough of when you get to space. So there's something about your taste buds. Don't know what it is. However, aromas, you don't get enough of it, partly because of the way things are packaged. And coffee, for instance, has this smell that you kind of consume while you're eating the food, but it's in a package that has a straw. You can't smell anything. So it still didn't stop me from drinking it, but you just couldn't smell it. And same with all the other foods. They come in a little package, and so you don't really smell it very well. And you'd miss that. When you come back to Earth, you find out just how important smell is when you're eating food. So, how does the space station smell? You know, this is a good question because in general, the space station smells like nothing. It's clean, except if you're in Node 3 and you're working out on the ARED machine and all of a sudden you smell something that you think is coming from the WHC, but it's actually, which is our space potty, but it's actually our Russian colleagues back in the service module open up a can of beef, and it gets into the air circulation system, and it makes its first stop in Node 3. And so at first you're like, oh, what is that? And oh wait, it's lunchtime. And then it's a much better smell into your brain. You know, mealtime in space can be a lot of fun. It's especially dinner time. At the end of this long day where 6 little pink bodies in space, working all day long, and we're rarely together working unless it's something very unique. We're all off doing our own thing. And to come together at the end of the day when you know that you've signed off with mission control and you're in that evening period of time, that you can sit around a table with your crewmates and share food. And when you're an international crew and you have food from your Russian crewmates, your Japanese roommates, well, that's what we are, crewmates. When you have everybody coming together at the table to share their food, that's one of the best parts about eating in space.
So I just finished eating and I have to enter in what I ate because the ground folks like to keep track of it, keep track of our calories, how much salt we're getting, how much protein, things like that. They track us closely on everything. When we lift weights, we have to keep track of how much weight we lift, how many reps we do. When we run on the treadmill, and computers are recording our heart rate. When we turn on lights, when we turn on the toilets. I learned on my first mission there are no secrets in space. We got video cameras in just about all the modules. So it's basically like being in a big fishbowl. The ground knows everything about us up here, which is not that big a deal, but it's something to keep in mind when you need a little privacy.
I'm just getting my safety cutter on the other side of my IDA back here. Copy, Terry. A lot easier without the pool stanchion.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just like in the pool instead of that, with the exception of that big blue planet down there.
Exactly.
As the International Space Station flies 257 statute miles over the coast of Chile, Terry Virts in the initial moments of his first spacewalk.
Welcome back, and thanks for watching this episode of Station Life. As you can see, space station nutrition research is vital towards improving the quality of human health and well-being in space and here on Earth. NASA is constantly searching for ways to benefit humanity as together we take the next steps towards exploring our universe, searching for the answers that matter to us the most. Thank you for joining us on Station Life and our behind-the-scenes look at nutrition research aboard the International Space Station. Be sure to stay in touch and follow us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest research news. And don't forget to download our fabulous app on your mobile device. Until next time, stay with us, off the Earth, for the Earth. I think it's time to eat.
We have a bold vision to go, and we do so knowing that space exploration has improved the human condition in countless ways. And it is the partnerships over the last 50 years that have ensured a steady progress in the science, technology, exploration, and discovery for the benefit of all. With America's new directive to put humans on the moon in 2024, NASA is leading the development of exploration capabilities, and we are building a coalition of nations that can help us get to the moon quickly and sustainably together.
Building on the lessons learned from the International Space Station, the key to sustainable lunar missions is establishing an orbiting lunar outpost that we call Gateway.
America will develop and launch Gateway's power propulsion element in the near future. This outpost will be built with open standards to allow collaboration and accessibility with our international and private partners.
The first of these international partnerships is a commitment from Canada to develop advanced robotics uniquely designed for human and robotic missions.
Accelerating the timeline means a lot more focus, means a lot more dedication to the task, and we're up for it.
We are looking to our international partners to develop additional components for Gateway, to include habitation capabilities, airlock, and logistics.
Gateway is a great step towards the future of the human being. It's a great pleasure to collaborate with NASA in that endeavor.
The Gateway is not the end state. It is a piece of a greater mission that will prove how to explore other worlds. With Mars on the horizon, together we can explore more of our solar system, our galaxy, and even the entire universe, and share in the knowledge and advances that will come.
NASA is one of our major cooperation partners in space exploration.
By going together to the moon, forward to the moon, whatever the time span is, the faster the better. That's something I really like.
We welcome a growing list of partners. And through our successes, we will change our perspective on the universe for generations to come. We go together.
Hello, I'm NASA Associate Administrator for Science, Thomas Zurbuchen. NASA is going to the moon with the Artemis program, and American companies of all sizes want to help our nation make its next giant leap. It is my pleasure to announce the companies who are joining the pool of NASA industry partners who will help our nation enable the first woman and next man to reach the lunar surface by 2024 and conduct significant science investigations. Through NASA's commercial lunar payload services, we're sending science and technology demonstrations to the lunar surface beginning in 2021. These payloads will help us study the moon and prove technologies that will need to eventually travel to Mars. Today, 5 new companies joined this great initiative. I want to congratulate the new CLIPS participants: Blue Origin, Ceres Robotics, Sierra Nevada Corporation, SpaceX, and Tyvak Nano Satellite Systems. We look forward to working with all of you. Together we are going.
It's great to be going back to the moon. An opportunity like this is the reason why many of us got into the space industry. Blue Origin will be offering its Blue Moon lander, the one that we've been working on for several years. With its BE-7 engine that we've been test firing at Marshall Space Flight Center, to the kilowatts of power it will provide to help it survive lunar night, to its flexible payload deck that will support everything from instruments to rovers, we're confident that this lander can support all of our needs, from exploration to science, as America returns to the surface of the moon, this time to stay.
We're delighted to have the opportunity to participate in NASA CLIPS program and to provide landers and deliver payloads to the moon's surface. Over the last 60 years, NASA and its partners have created the opportunities we have today to go back to the moon, to go on to Mars and beyond. Our thanks to NASA and all who have made this possible.
Hi, Steve Lindsay here. I'm Senior Vice President of Strategy for SNC Space Systems Business Area. SNC is thrilled to have been selected for commercial lunar payload services to support Artemis missions and the next stage of lunar exploration. For CLIPS, we'll be applying experience and knowledge from our Lunar Gateway programs, satellites, and cargo resupply services for space station through our Dream Chaser spacecraft. CLIPS is an amazing opportunity to advance science, exploration, and learn more about the lunar surface. Thank you, NASA, for your trust. SNC is proud to partner with you again, and we can't wait to get working on CLIPS and many other programs.
Hey everybody, we are super excited that NASA selected us for the CLIPS program. I think Starship is going to be an extraordinary help and benefit to deliver both science, technology, and even cargo to the lunar surface. Starship is a great vehicle. It's fully reusable, so not only can it take a lot to the surface of the moon, but it's also quite affordable. Thanks to NASA, we are the company that we are today, and we're really thrilled to continue the partnership on the CLIPS program.
We look forward to working with our partners and apply flight-proven expertise to design, develop, and operate a lunar lander to the moon's surface. We continue to value our relationship, and we'd like to thank NASA for including us in such an instrumental project.
Setting a bold goal in human space exploration with the Artemis program,
to return American astronauts to the moon within the next 5 years.
While celebrating Apollo's historic first steps onto the moon, and kicking off the 20th year of humans continuously living and working in space. Here's a look back at those things and plenty more awesomeness that happened this year at NASA. Our plan to return humans to the moon with the Artemis program was adjusted, with 2024 now being the new target for landing the first woman and next man on the lunar surface.
This is a critical capability for not just a sustainable lunar return, but also an eventual journey to Mars.
Our Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS initiative, selected commercial moon landers to deliver science and technology demonstrations to the surface in 2021 that could pave the way for the arrival of astronauts. One tech demonstration, known as Viper, is a lunar mobile robot that will collect data on water ice to inform the first global water resource maps of the moon. We also talked to American companies about developing reusable lunar landers and systems for future human missions to the moon. And we selected a company to provide power and propulsion for our Gateway, an outpost to orbit around the moon from which astronauts will shuttle to and from the lunar surface. And when we do go, our Orion spacecraft, its European Space Agency-built service module, and our RS-25 engines and Space Launch System rocket will get us there. We made significant progress in 2019 building and testing these systems for our upcoming Artemis I uncrewed flight test. And what's a next-generation mission without next-generation spacesuits? Took care of that too in 2019 with new spacesuits that fit better and provide better mobility for astronauts exploring the lunar surface. And from our Mars robotic explorers, for the first time ever, our InSight lander measured and recorded a likely Marsquake. Our Mars helicopter technology was put through some rigorous testing in preparation for its launch on the Mars 2020 rover mission. Also taking that ride will be more than 10 million names of Earthlings etched on dime-sized microchips installed on the rover. It was a milestone year for humans in space. We began our 20th consecutive year with humans aboard the International Space Station and conducted several important spacewalks, including the first ever by an all-woman team of spacewalkers, a series of complex spacewalks to repair a cosmic ray detector, and an outing to help install a new docking adapter to accommodate future arrivals of various spacecraft, including commercial crew spacecraft built by Boeing and SpaceX.
Ignition, liftoff.
The SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft made the first ever docking to the International Space Station during its uncrewed flight test for NASA's Commercial Crew program. Meanwhile, NASA and Boeing are learning lessons from the uncrewed test flight of Boeing's CST-100 Starliner, which launched on December 20th, but was unable to dock with the space station. 5 successful commercial cargo missions with Northrop Grumman and SpaceX delivered more than 32,000 pounds of science investigations, spacewalking tools, and critical supplies to the station. A new policy was announced in 2019 making the space station available for commercial business ventures. And results from our landmark twins study of astronaut brothers Mark and Scott Kelly were published. Data from the study could help maintain crew health during exploration missions to the moon and Mars. Lots of happenings in our solar system and beyond. Our New Horizons spacecraft rang in the new year with a record-breaking flyby of a Kuiper Belt object 4 billion miles from our sun. We announced a new mission to Saturn's icy moon Titan to search for the building blocks of life. Our Sophia Airborne Observatory detected helium hydride, the first type of molecule to ever form in the universe, in a planetary nebula some 3,000 light-years away from us. We helped capture the first ever image of a black hole and its shadow. Data from our Hubble Space Telescope showed water vapor for the first time in the atmosphere of a planet outside our solar system that resides in the habitable zone. Researchers hope to further study 3 new worlds discovered by our TESS spacecraft 73 light-years from Earth, a nearly Earth-sized one next to 2 others known as mini-Neptunes. The first data shared from super-close, record-breaking flybys of our sun by NASA's Parker Solar Probe revealed new insights into solar dynamics that can affect astronauts and technology in space.
Pegasus away.
And we air-launched a mission to help us better understand the physical processes at play in the ionosphere that are potentially detrimental to radio communications, satellites, and the physical health of astronauts. Highlights from the world of space technology include the launch of several NASA technology demonstrations aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket. The demonstrations are designed to test less toxic fuel for spacecraft, new ways to navigate in space, processes affecting space communications, and to look at the space environment around Earth and how it affects us. 3 free-flying robots sent to the space station on Northrop Grumman's Cygnus spacecraft will help develop and test technologies for use in zero gravity and do routine chores so astronauts can do other important tasks. Our 3D printed Habitat Challenge featured teams combining creativity and cutting-edge technology to manufacture sustainable shelters for use on exploration missions, including to the Moon and Mars. We had another amazing year observing Earth from space. Cameras outside the International Space Station captured views of Hurricane Dorian, which reached Category 5 status and devastated the northern Bahama Islands. We used data from a Japanese satellite to produce a map for use by officials to assess damage from 2 strong earthquakes that rattled Southern California. Our Earth-observing Terra satellite captured images of California's devastating Kincaid fire. The blaze was fueled by nearly 100-mile-per-hour winds, known as Diablo winds. And a next-generation high-resolution imaging suite sent to the space station to identify materials on Earth's surface, whether they be natural or human-made, could be used for resource exploration, agriculture, forestry, and other environmental areas. In flight, we continued groundbreaking research to help develop a new improved global aviation system. This included our X-57 Maxwell aircraft, which uses an electric propulsion technology that could increase efficiency while decreasing emissions and noise. Meanwhile, our X-59 Quiet Supersonic Technology project successfully completed in-flight testing of software and imaging technology that enables pilots to safely maneuver the skies without a forward-facing window. And we conducted the final and most complex season of flight tests for our Unmanned Aircraft Systems Traffic Management Project, or UTM, which seeks to integrate drones safely and efficiently into air traffic that is already flying in low-altitude airspace.
And there they are, the men of Apollo 11, immortalized in bronze.
Our historic accomplishments were a big focus in 2019. Our celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon mission included a NASA TV special and a series of other events around the country. The historic Apollo Mission Operations Control Room was restored so that visitors can see the room exactly as it appeared during the Apollo moon missions. And we held a ceremony to rename the street in front of our headquarters in Washington, D.C. to Hidden Figures Way, in honor of the women who performed vital math calculations in the early days of America's space program. Those are some of the highlights from 2019, the year at NASA. For more details, visit nasa.gov/2019. Happy holidays, thanks for watching, and we look forward to sharing more exploration and discoveries with you in 2020.